Just a little more talk about sanders and sanding devices and stuff like that. A lot of the things I do is carved or sculpted, so there's a lot of curves, and that kind of makes it challenging for sanding. I mean, sanding a flat tabletop, you can just use a flat sander, an orbital sander, or something like that, but I do a lot of stuff that has lots of curves, and it kind of gets challenging sometimes. So one thing I really like is these little tubes. Now this one I got at Canadian Tire. They're just little tubes for usually a spindle sander. So what I'll do is I'll take these guys, and this I actually got from my rigid sander. It's a spindle sander. And I take these and I take the tubes and get various grits. I think this is an 80. And I'm able to really get into areas and make round curves. So, and then I'll just basically graduate up the different grits, and it allows me to kind of get into some tight places and really make sure there's no lumps in a transition. A lot of times you have long grain and end grain coming at each other, so you tend to get a lump at the joint. So these guys I find really work well for that. And you can get lots of various sizes. I think you can get up all the way to, I think, 1.5 inches or 2 inches. So they get quite large and they work really well. These guys are 1/2 inch. So what I do is I take a 1/2 inch dowel and I just take this 1/2 inch guy and put on there. And basically it just becomes almost like a large round rasp, but they work really well. And I'll show you kind of how I use those a little bit. Some other things that I use, I got this at, I think I got it at Rona. It's just a little sander, and I'm able to put whatever hook and loop or Velcro sandpaper on there, and it's really good because I can really get into different areas, and it's kind of malleable, so I can really kind of work on a transition. Some other little things I make, kind of silly, but I'll take a really thin piece of walnut or something, nice and flexible piece of ash or something, glue some sandpaper to it, and then I'm able to use it in small areas, kind of like that. And, you know, it's bendable, so we can kind of get into some interesting areas and get right up to an edge. I find that's really good. So, and plus you can wrap the sandpaper on the ends to kind of butt up against something, and obviously you can make them thicker or thinner, different grits, and they're quite good. These aren't sanders, but it's the step right before sanding. So just a comment about sanding in that I tend to try to get rid of all my lumps and bumps and kind of weird things in the wood with a rasp beforehand. So I'll go with the rasp, and then usually I'll do kind of some hand sanding, and then I'll go to an orbital sander. So these are made in France. Probably gonna say the name wrong. Logier rasps, so L-I-O-G-I-E-R. That's the spelling. They're really great. I can't say anything more about these other than they're awesome. Another thing that's kind of fun around the shop, this was a pad for a Festool sander that the Velcro basically just got wrecked over time. You know, paper rips and the Velcro gets kind of burnt and melts. What I did is I took an a bandsaw and I just cut it, and then basically what I do is I just put some sandpaper on there. And what that does is they're quite soft and they have corners, so you're able to really, you know, work on things in interesting places. You know, you're able to kind of get along next to something and squish it. And then these guys, they have the corners, so you can kind of get into a corner. You can wrap the sandpaper around to really get into interesting places. So something that you might actually just throw in the garbage, well, it works really well for just kind of hand sanding. So obviously vary the grits, and obviously they make the harder pads, so you can get the harder interface, so you can kind of do a little more aggressive work. And this, of course, I kind of explained one of these before. 2 pieces of wood, put some sandpaper in between, lock it together, nice flat sander. Works really well. So just some simple things. So what I'll do right now is I'll just show you how I use a couple of these things. So this is one situation I was talking about earlier. Here's a case where I have a transition between long grain and end grain. So basically you've got 2 different grains coming together. So what tends to happen is you tend to get a bump right in here because it's easier to sand this than this, so this just doesn't work down as quickly. So I would like to in that situation, I like to use something really aggressive to start. And again, this isn't sandpaper, but I just basically shape this down to make it as smooth as possible, because it's aggressive enough that it's gonna kind of take this harder stuff down quicker. Okay, so once I've done that, then I'll chase it with a rasp that's a lot less aggressive, kind of get rid of some of the deep marks. Okay, so once I do that, then I'll go in with something like this, one of these round guys. And what I like about it is it's kind of already the shape of this. So basically I just kind of get in there and I'm able to sand, right? So that works really well. And like just like that. Now another thing, I find a lot of my shapes actually kind of mimic the sanding device. So this here is kind of just a nice little curve. So this, I just use it right in here. So that basically is the same radius. So I didn't make it like that. The sander made it like that. So I kind of picked the shape I want, and then I basically let the sander do what it does. So I'm able to get in here, really shape this well. I don't find there are a lot of other tools that really do that as well as these. So I'll get the shape, and then I can go in and sand both of these with my Festool Rotex sanders. So it's just, this does a lot of the work, and then the Rotex will just come in and make it all smooth. So there's something here, it's probably hard to see on the camera, but I have the back of the headrest of the chair, and then I have a little detail right here, so it just kind of ramps up and then cuts over. So this is really hard to create. You can do it with a sander here, but when you get up to here, your sandpaper always catches and tears almost instantly. So what I do is I take this little thing I made, and I have some 80 grit and then 120 grit, and again, I can just take it in there and make that shape that I really want. So it's quite a small radius. This is 1/2 inch, so it works really, really well. So put the 80 in there, and then I can get the 120 in there. And usually by then, I'm able to get my sander in there just to kind of come up and polish it. So I don't know, this would be really difficult to do in any other way. You could maybe get a rasp in there, but then you're not really getting a lot of sanding down here. So I find these, you know, a couple of bucks from Canadian Tire and or Amazon, they're on there too. It works really well to make a shape that I haven't really had much success making in any other way. And then of course, I get these guys in there just to finish it up if I need to. Do a little more work before I get the orbital sanders involved. But yeah, so think about this again, like I was saying, it conforms really nice. It's in there, works really well. Show you this little detail here. It's kind of hard to see from that camera angle, but you can just see there's a bit of a raise in there. Come around here, see it better from here. If the camera would focus, there we go. So it's, you can kind of just see there's a bit of a lip right in here. And right now I just thought I would talk about Festool sanders. So these guys are made by Festool, and they have a vacuum associated with them. So basically there's holes in the sandpaper, you have a vacuum that sucks out the dust. The other big feature on these sanders is something called the Rotex mode. So basically you just switch in between kind of a normal orbital and Rotex. So normal orbital just behaves like a normal orbital sander, and Rotex behaves what I would describe as a grinder. So it doesn't stop turning. So it doesn't matter how you hold the sander, it doesn't matter how the face is hitting your workpiece, it's always turning. So it's always like a grinder. This is the 6-inch RO, so Rotex 150. They make a 90, which is a 3-inch. It's smaller, and then this is the 5-inch. So these guys, just talking about the 6-inch for now, but all the other sanders have the same options. You get different pads, so this is a nice thick soft pad, and they have a hard pad, so it's thinner. You can just swap these guys out. They have a really good series of interface pads, so if you want to do some contoured sanding and stuff like that, it'll squish to that. Or they have kind of the medium ones. I don't use this one a whole lot, but it's still pretty good. It just gives a little bit more give to the sandpaper. And then in my series of sandpaper, like I said before, when I go through, sometimes I even start with 40 and work up to 320, and then I use the 400 grit platen pads. So these are like a foam pad with a sander, and this gets almost all of my scratches, so absolutely love these. They're a little expensive. They're probably, I think they work out to $10 or $12 per pad, so I'm very careful with them. The other thing I'll do is once the edges tear, I'll just cut out a small circle and I'll just use it on the small guy. So I kind of get a double use out of this, so it's quite good. I just thought I'd take a second to show you the strength of this sander. And I'd say kind of all of them are about the same. They all have a lot of power. They don't stop. I don't think I've ever stopped this sander. You will tear the sandpaper or chip the wood before this thing stops. So it's really good. So I'll just show you really quickly. The other thing I'll try to show you is the vacuum. Now, at first, when I was looking at these sanders, I was a little bit skeptical. I kind of thought, well, is it really going to suck up that much dust? And I tell you, it does. It is absolutely incredible the amount of dust this thing picks up. I still usually wear a mask and stuff like that, just because if you're doing something on an edge like that, the vacuum, of course, is going to have a hard time pulling up some of the stuff that flows around. But on a flat surface, it's sucking up pretty much all of the dust, so it's really quite good. Yeah, so let's give you a quick demonstration on the power of this. I'm just going to use kind of a worn out 80 grit. Hopefully that'll kind of demonstrate the power of it, and I'll also show you what it's like with and without the vacuum. So where I'm at right now is I've pretty much got the shape I want down. Now, I run my finger across there. It's not perfectly smooth, but it's very, very close. There's no lumps. So really all I'm looking to do now is to start polishing the surface. Maybe just make this transition just slightly nicer, but I don't want to remove a lot of material. So what I like about the Rotex sanders is I find they're predictable. Because if you have it in Rotex mode, it's always spinning the same. So if I'm to sand this, I kind of know what to expect. In the past, I've used some sanders that kind of have an orbital mode where, depending on how you hold it, kind of depends on how much it's spinning. So I find that these are just more predictable. Okay, so I just sanded this joint with the RO90 and 80 grit paper. The joint feels really good. There's no lumps or bumps, so I'm very happy with that. And a lot of the scratches have been removed now. So what I'll do is I'll just go through the different steps. 120, 180, 220, 320, 400. I got this new tool from Lee Valley. It's a small bow sander. So I'm just going to open it up and see what it's like. Alright, so I'm just doing a really quick test on this Lee Valley bow sander. We just put it together, and I just want to see how it does on curves. That's kind of why I got it. I thought it'd be nice. It keeps nice tension, yet it'll kind of hopefully conform to the piece. So thing like I look for when I'm sanding something like this, like a rocking chair leg, is I'm trying to get a nice round on here, but I also want this to be flat, right? So a lot of times with certain sanders, you know, if you have a block sander, it'll kind of make a flat spot, or, you know, you won't be able to do your round very well. So far, this has been pretty good. It's conforms enough to the round of the leg to kind of shape it, but it seems also that it has enough tension in it. Like when I feel this, I don't have any lumps in there. It's actually quite nice. So yeah, so far I'm really happy with this. So this is the headrest on a rocker. I have the chair upside down. Because this is pretty stiff, it works at keeping things flat, but it has just enough bend in it that I can actually take this and really nicely get into this area, which normally is quite difficult to get any sander in here. A block sander won't fit. The large face of a any kind of a hand sander won't really get in here either. So usually I'm stuck using like little tubes, but I just kind of discovered this actually does quite a nice job in here. So that is for me, that's a very nice added bonus, and it can kind of conform to all these different shapes in here. So it seems like it's rigid enough to keep things flat, but bendable enough to kind of work its way into corners. So I really like it. And when I've been working this transition here, you know, and I run my thumb across there, it's flat. So it's not, it doesn't seem to be leaving any major bumps. So for me, that is that in itself is worth it. So this is another sanding device I created. There are situations where you want to make a joint between two pieces of wood and you can't really cut them to be the same angle or whatever. So what you want to do is you actually want to sand in between to remove wood to mimic the shape of the other piece of wood. So what you'll do is you'll take a piece of sandpaper and sand in between the two, and basically the pressure on one side will push against the other and they'll conform to one another. So what they'll do is they'll take a piece of sandpaper and just kind of drag it through there. It got a little bit tough to just hold it with my thumb, so what I did is I actually took two pieces of wood, cut some little notches in here just to make it ergonomic. Two screws on each side, just basically these pieces of wood are compressing in between, compressing to hold the sandpaper in place. What I'm going to do is I will take this and just lift the joint apart. The rocker's clamped to the worktop, but all I'm going to do is just drag in between. And so what this is doing is it's sanding this leg to be like the rocker. And I'll just keep doing this until the fit is nice and tight. The other thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is you don't want to pull up like this because the sandpaper will start to round the leg. What you want to do is pull it downward like that, so the back where there is no grit, it'll just roll across this piece of wood. If I'm trying to bring this over and I want there to be a small flat edge on this one side, it's very difficult to kind of see that it's consistent and flat. Again, depending on your light. Right now it's not too bad, but there on the other side I had direct light and this all looked like one piece and it's very difficult to see. So what I'll do is I'll just take a pencil and I'll basically just kind of shade this edge here. When I go to sand this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sand this top edge down to however much is required to get this flat. And the fact that this has pencil on it and this pencil will be taken off, I'll have a good contrast so I can actually see that that lip or this edge is nice and flat and flush. As you can see, I've removed the pencil here, but there's my edge I want, and then there's a bit of a lip here where the pencil isn't being removed. So that tells me that this is a little bit higher than this, and I couldn't see that before, but now that the pencil is left behind, I can actually tell there is in fact a lip there that I need to get rid of. So it might be hard to see in the video, but basically now all I have is this thin edge here that still has pencil on it. And what I did is I was able to make it a lot more consistently thick because I was able to actually see where the true edge was. Now, the other thing that I didn't mention but is notable here is that I didn't just go in and try and like work that little piece out. I actually took the whole arm down, because what happens is if you have kind of what it was is this, I just had a little bit of a low right next to this edge. And so if I was just to go in and work that low, well then I'd have a bump here. So what I wanted to actually do was make sure that I'm bringing everything down together. So I started up here and worked it all the way down, and then got to this spot, flattened it, and now I have a nice consistent edge. Now I can go by and sand this, get rid of all the pencil, and we're good to go.